Hello and welcome. My name is Eddie Jennings from ejsllc.com, and in this video I'm going to talk about deploying Active Directory domain services to new Windows Server installation and whether or not you can use the non-GUI version of Windows Server and whether or not you should use a non-GUI version if you can. Well, the quick answer to the first question is yes, you can deploy Active Directory domain services and really any Windows service to the version of the server without the GUI. So the question becomes, why would we do this? Well, the first answer to that really comes from Microsoft itself, as far as they're pushing us toward using the command line more and more with Windows Server, and especially not just command line as far as command.exe, but using PowerShell with that. And you saw this with Server 2012. That's where Server Core came out, and then this was much more present in Server 2016 and especially in Server 2019. When you go through the installer for Windows Server, if you want to have the desktop experience, as it's called, or which is server with a GUI, you have to select that option. What appears in the installer as the standard option is just Server 2019 standard or data center, depending on the media you have. And if you choose that option, after the installer finishes, you're presented with a command prompt, just like we have in Linux and how it's been there since the beginning of time. So just from the fact that Microsoft is pushing this, in my opinion, gives you a good reason to continue following that and staying with the non-GUI version of Windows Server for installing and configuring Active Directory domain services. Now, of course, you would not make every IT decision you have based off of what Microsoft wants. Obviously, you have to do what makes sense for your business. But there are some other reasons to consider why you would want to use the non-GUI version of, or rather, not really non-GUI version, but Windows Server without the GUI for deploying AD domain services. One is resources. A server without a GUI uses fewer resources, and if you're doing this in a home lab or a training lab, this can be pretty important, because you might be in a situation where like RAM and such is at a premium for you, and once you get past that initial Windows Server installation with the GUI, the server itself without the GUI can run on less RAM, and so you don't have to use as many resources for it. Also, from a security perspective, the command line is going to be the best way to go. Any application can be exploited. A lot of applications are not exploited, but that doesn't mean that they can't be. And when you have the GUI installed on the server, there are other processes and other small little applications that have to be present and have to run in order to support the GUI, which means that's a greater attack surface for nefarious characters and such. If you don't have the GUI, then you don't have those potential vulnerabilities available. Also, from patching, you will find that the without having the GUI, patching tends to be quicker, because just like with the fact that you have fewer vulnerabilities, there are fewer things that need to be patched on Windows Server if you don't have the GUI there. The final thing is performance. Now, I have not taken the time to sit with a stopwatch and reboot a server without the GUI and reboot a server with the GUI, and I can give you some kind of hard facts on how long that takes. But just some anecdotal evidence. I noticed this at work today, actually, working with Server 2016, that the amount of time it takes to reboot a server core version or server without the GUI is significantly less than with the GUI. Well, you might think, oh, rebooting, how important is that? Well, when you multiply that over hundreds of servers, that can become a significant amount of time. So I would say, as a young Windows administrator, if you're just getting into the field and getting your skills and such, I encourage you to learn how to manage your Windows servers, and in particular, if you're having to deploy Active Directory, do that from the command line, and specifically use PowerShell from the command line to do that. Make that just the standard skill set for yourself. If you are a veteran Windows admin and you're deploying newer servers, Server 2016, Server 2019, I would encourage you as well to use the non-GUI or Windows Server with without the GUI, simply because A, it's a skill set you need, and B, why waste the resources on the GUI when you probably don't need it? And ultimately, when you're making the decision to deploy Active Directory domain services after you've made the decision of whether or not you need AD domain services to begin with, is unless there's some compelling reason to need to have a GUI on the server that's going to become a domain controller, I would stick with what Microsoft is pushing and do it without having the GUI. Now, in a future video, I'm actually going to go through the steps of how you do this. I'll have a VM that I'm using as a domain controller, a VM that I'm using as a member workstation, and I'll go through how to set up AD, a new AD forest and OUs and such, strictly from PowerShell. And when you watch that, actually, if you click, I believe in the upper right corner, the little eye there, I'll have a link to that video. You'll find it's really not that difficult. And as far as managing Active Directory, there are still several GUI tools that you would use for that, but rather than logging into the server itself and doing that, you would install those either on your jump box or on your workstation, the RSAT, the remote server administration tools, or some of the stuff that now comes if you were to deploy the Windows Admin Center. You would use other resources to manage the Active Directory, but as far as the domain controller server itself, there's no need to have the GUI on it. Feel free to comment, let your voice be heard about whether or not you like working with or without the GUI on Windows Server, in particular with Active Directory deployment and configuration and just general administration of it. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you click like and also subscribe to the channel so you'll be aware of when new content comes available. Thanks for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you the next time.